Hello, everybody. My name is Christy Craig, and I am the publisher at Hidden Timber Books. First of all, if you've been to any of our readings, for anyone out there watching this recording later, this isn't my usual background. As life would have it, we had to go out of town. But I am committed to, and I'm by a burger place, which is kind of fun. I'm committed to making sure that this reading happens. So thank you, Donna, for your patience, and to everybody else who's watching. So welcome to our Small Press Author Reading Series. This has been a really fun series of events, and I'm thrilled to have Donna Miscolta today to read from her book of short stories, Living Color, Angie Rubio Stories, which is published by Jaded, Ibis Press. And just to give you a little bit of background on Donna Miscolta is the author of 3 books, When the De La Cruz Family Danced, Hola and Goodbye, Una Familia in Stories, and Living Color, Angie Rubio Stories. You can go to her website, which I will put in the chat box, so that you can take a look at those books and read more about each one. It sounds like there's some fascinating characters and storylines in the books. She was born in San Diego, but grew up in National City, California. She writes of immigrants, of racism, of the need to belong, and of characters in search of self. She now lives in Seattle, and I'm thrilled again to have you here. So welcome, Donna. I will pass the baton to you.
Thank you, Christy. Thanks for having me on this series. I really appreciate it. I love the focus on small press books, which can be overlooked a lot of times among the many larger press books that are often better resourced in terms of promotion and distribution. And I would like to thank Jaded Ibis Press for the work they've done on behalf of Living Color. Living Color, Angie Rubio Stories, as a subtitle suggests, is a collection of stories about a particular character named Angie Rubio. And each of the stories looks at what happens in a particular grade at school in Angie's life. And what she learns there in school, and not necessarily in the classroom as part of the curriculum. They're life lessons about how the world is structured in a way that favors neither Angie's gender or race. And there are several things I'd like to cover in the readings that I'm going to do, and they're going to be fairly short readings. One of them is how racism and ignored histories enter our consciousness at a very young age. And it's a time when we receive this information, we don't have the means to process it and understand it. Another thing I want to share that I feel is embedded in these stories is how there's an easy acceptance of predetermined roles by both children and adults. And a third thing is that how despite setbacks, those who are the targets of microaggressions, such as Angie in this story, they continue to challenge those things, even in very small ways. So I have several pieces that I want to share, and as I said, they're fairly short. And in between each piece, I'd love to answer any questions or respond to any comments that you might have. So the first is actually the opening scene from the first story, called "Welcome to Kindergarten," and it looks at how racism and unacknowledged or ignored histories enter into our consciousness. In the morning welcome circle, Angie could see all the faces of her classmates, all of them pink, pale, or freckled. Then there was hers, toast, well done, not unlike the Hawaiian she'd expected to see at Charles W. Nimitz Elementary, her new school with an un-Hawaiian name and no Hawaiians in the classroom. There was a teacher whose skin was neither brown nor white, but the beige of cake batter. Everything else about her, though, shrilled with color. Her purple dress and green high heels, the yellow beads at her neck, the orange powder on her cheeks, and the candy red lips. Her hair was construction paper black. She looked like she lived in a comic book. She said her name was Mrs. Pye, and the children laughed, but she didn't smile. And for some reason, this made Angie long for Hawaiians in the classroom. At recess, she found Eva, a second grader, playing hopscotch with a girl with muddy blonde hair and 3 moles on her cheek. "Where are the Hawaiians?" Angie asked her sister. Eva, who knew everything, told her coldly, "Hawaiians are extinct." Angie knew the term extinct, having heard it from Eva's lips before in reference to dinosaurs, dodo birds, and jitterbugs. Angie didn't believe that Hawaiians were extinct. She'd seen them herself, and so had Eva, when they stood on the deck of their docking ship. Their father had taken pictures with his movie camera. Their mother held thumb-sucking Letty in one arm and pointed with the other. "Look at the hula dancers." It's true that she hadn't called them Hawaiians. So now Angie asked Eva, "What about the hula dancers?" The girl with the moles whipped her skinny hair around. "Those are just shows. I'm taking hula lessons, and I'm going to be in a show." She jerked her hips and made wiggly motions with her arms, which made Angie want to change the subject. "Guess what my teacher's name is?" "Mrs. Pye," said Eva, who knew everything. "She's mean," said the girl with the moles, "and she's Chinese." The girl pulled at the corners of her eyes. While the girl with the moles was busy making Chinese eyes, Angie watched Eva nudge the girl's hopscotch marker back a square. In the afternoon, Mrs. Pye announced it was large motor skills time, and she clapped her hands and trotted around in her high green shoes, urging the children into her circle. Then she set the record on the phonograph spinning. "Skip to my loo," she ordered. Angie obeyed along with the other children, their heads earnestly bobbing as their arms swung and their legs kicked. Except rather than alternate her kicks, Angie canted along, her right foot never surrendering the lead to her left. Suddenly the music stopped and Mrs. Pye clip-clopped her way through the children, frozen in mid-skip, until she came to Angie, whose stubborn right foot remained flagrantly ahead of her left. Mrs. Pye said, "If you can't skip, you shouldn't be in kindergarten." She set the record playing again, and as the other children skipped even more earnestly now, Angie stood at Mrs. Pye's desk, watching her write a note of harsh scribbles. Up this close, Angie could smell the powder on Mrs. Pye's face, see the furriness of her black eyebrows, and the wrinkles at the edges of her lollipop mouth. "I hate to do this," Mrs. Pye said, as she finished her note and folded it 3 times. Nevertheless, she pinned it to Angie's dress. After school, Eva unpinned the note but couldn't make out the scrawl. Still, she pronounced to Angie, "You're in trouble," and she handed the note to her. Angie said she was quitting kindergarten. "You can't quit, it's against the law." And Eva, who knew everything, told how in Hawaiian jails they only gave you coconuts to eat and drink, and there were no toilets, just the scooped out coconut husks to pee in. Angie began to cry. Eva put her arm around her, a rare gesture that made Angie cry harder and made Eva impatient. "Don't be a kindergarten baby," she said, and then she huffed away down the street toward the row of Navy housing. Angie watched her sister move farther and farther away, fiercely wishing her extinct. She clutched at the note in her hand, squeezing it into a clump. She hurled it in front of her, but it landed at her feet and a lady yelled from a passing car for her to pick up that trash. Instead, she kicked at it with her right foot and took a step and kicked with her left and took another step to kick with her right again. Back and forth she went. Step right, kick left, step left, kick right, skip to my loo. So the first thing that Angie is conscious of is that she is one of the few brown faces in the classroom. And this is soon followed by the humiliation visited upon her by her teacher, pointing out that she is skipping improperly. And the other thing that's on her mind is where and who are the Hawaiians. She has seen hula dancers, and this intrigues her, but then she runs into this little blonde girl who says that she's taking hula lessons and hula dancers, hula shows are just dances. And so even though these are children and their limits of understanding are kind of limited at the time, the sources of their information are school and home. And So if the prevailing attitude is that Hawaiians are just a dance, then it really sort of ignores them as a people with a history. And this is actually set just in pre-statehood in Hawaii. So there's, even though children aren't really aware of that, I think that this whole thing about not understanding or not acknowledging Hawaiians in their land is something that has, it has been an issue for such a long time. So I'm just wondering if anybody has any questions about that particular thing that I just read, or I could move on.
And I can get things started. I'm curious, I read a little bit into your book, and some of your stories that are in there. And I was just wondering, how did you come to the character of Angie Rubio? Is she a composite of different people that you've met? Is she someone that you've imagined? But, often we ask authors, what was the impetus for your story? Was it the character first or an experience? But, this is a whole book about Angie Rubio and her experiences as she grows up. So I'm just wondering, what came to mind, or how did she come to mind?
Well, I will say that a lot of my fiction, I borrow incidents from real life, things that I grew up, things that I observed, stories that I've stolen from family members or friends, because but this particular book, Angie Rubio, a lot of the incidents are things I based that on things I experienced. And I think this sort of thing has been on my mind for a long time. In fact, I had an essay that I wrote many years ago that was based on something that happened to me in kindergarten that actually I put into this book. And it started out as an essay, but it was never very satisfactory to me. And so what I realized is that it helped for me to fictionalize it. And so that's what I've done with a lot of these incidents that happened to me. I have fictionalized it. I have sort of invested a lot of my own insecurities growing up and put that into Angie. But I also feel that she's a completely different being than I am. She's fictional, but I think that she represents a lot of what many people experience when they grow up. And I think this is a book that a lot of people can relate to in many ways, because I think who among us hasn't in some way been made to feel small or humiliated or othered. And I think seeing this character, seeing these incidents through a character like Angie adds that dimension of color and gender, which I think it adds to the discussion about these things.
Yeah, I like what you talk about, that that idea of feeling othered. And yeah, I think there's a lot that I missed growing up because I wasn't paying attention to the people around me, and often you aren't when you're young. But my experiences would have been very different from yours. And I just think about the things that when I was young, I wish I had learned. I wish people had conversations. I wish I had books to read that would have explained a little bit more outside of my own understanding. And so that idea of being othered, and that idea of that school and home are the only sources of information that we have when we're young, that's so important. Yeah.
Right, and some of that information can be wrong, like when Angie's sister tells her that, there are no toilets in Hawaiian jails.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to hear you read another excerpt if you'd like to.
Sure. So the second scene I want to share illustrates how in children's play, there's a subconscious acceptance of roles when it comes to skin color. And this is from This is from the second story in here. Right, the second story. It's called Monster. And we just heard that word recently in the news. Okay, Susie piped up first. Do you want to play house? Okay, Luann said. I'll be the mother, Susie said, pulling the hula skirt on beneath the cape. She pointed at Luann. You can be the father. I'll be the daughter, Angie said. No, Susie said, we're newlyweds. We don't have any children yet. Then how can you be the mother if you don't have any kids? Angie said. It's just pretend, Susie chided, hands on her hula hips. Angie looked to Luann for support, but Luann just shrugged. Then who will I be? You can be the mailman. Angie wasn't sure she wanted to be the mailman. Or the burglar, Susie said. Angie decided to be the mailman, but it was soon clear how limited her role was. Well, Susie as a mother got to paint her toenails, drink coffee, go shopping, and tell her husband to get his feet off the furniture. And Luann as a father got to shave, read the paper, go to work, and come home and ask his wife to get him his slippers. Angie as the mailman had only the mail to deliver, which was just folded strips of paper in an old cloth purse. Once Angie tried to deliver the mail Once Angie tried to deliver the mail twice, but Susie told her the real mail only came once a day. Angie had to wait until Susie the mother and Luann the father had dinner, watched TV, went to bed, and got up the next morning before she could deliver the mail again. Can we play a different game? To Angie's surprise, Susie agreed. In fact, she was enthusiastic. She started clapping her hands and bouncing in her pretend high heels. I know what we can play. She clattered into her house and came back with her bride's dress flapping behind her. This game is called Prettiest Girl. Angie didn't like the sound of it, hated it, in fact. And yet she asked, how do you play that game, Susie? Let's pretend I'm the prettiest girl in the world. She pointed at Luann. You can be the handsome prince who saves me. Saves you from what? Angie asked. The ugly monster. I don't think I want to play, Angie said. Susie had already stripped off her hula skirt and cape and was stepping into the bride's dress. Her face went pouty and hard for a moment, her eyes mean, and Angie was fascinated by this transformation. Angie and her sisters were always being admonished not to make a scene. Angie couldn't help but stare at this display of real feelings. Luann was looking on disapprovingly. No one's making you play, Susie said. It's a free country. It's the United States of America where we live, you know. We went to the Hawaii's estate celebration. I wore a pink muumuu and a lei with red, white, and blue flowers. Angie wanted to clap her hands over her ears, but instead just turned to go home. But Susie pulled her back. Her face changed again, brilliant with aggressive goodwill. Here, she said, thrusting the cape at Angie. You can wear the cape. Seduced by the cape, Angie agreed to be the monster. She tied the cape around her shoulders, enjoying the way it fell and spread down her back. She swung her torso so that the cape wrapped itself around her hips and legs. She took some running steps and felt it fly out behind her. Even as she made scary monster growling sounds as she chased Susie, the prettiest girl in the world, and was fended off by Luann, the handsome prince, Angie made believe she was special in her red cape, that she was loved and adored, even that she was Miss America. So notice how readily Susie assigns the less desirable roles to Angie. And Angie accepts them reluctantly, but she does accept them. She does have the ulterior motive of wanting to play with Susie's cache of toys. So she's doing some internal bartering, but all the same, Susie has a power because she has these possessions. And also she has a greater sense of self-assuredness, a greater sense of worth, a greater sense of importance than Angie does.
I really like that phrase, aggressive goodwill, when her face changed. That, boy, you know, you mentioned that we heard monster in the news recently, and that aggressive goodwill seems to be, you know, out there as well.
Yeah, although I think in the news when we heard it, it wasn't it wasn't goodwill. It was aggressive, but it wasn't goodwill.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
It was intentional evil, as I would say.
Yeah. Um, I was kind of perusing your website, and I noticed on your blog that you had written about publishing, that this would be the second book to come out during an election year. And, you know, that now not only is it an election year, it's the middle of a pandemic. I mean, there's so many things that affect what has been your book release, that in a, you know, average time or normal time or whatever you want to call it, you'd have so many different opportunities to talk about the book, to promote the book. And you know, I'm wondering, since this is the second one to come out in an election year, what were some of the things that you prepared yourself for? But again, even so, I wonder if there aren't some, there's a lot of challenges, but are there some maybe tiny blessings, in a sense, of being in a pandemic and having to do things differently? Did you discover different ways to meet with people to talk about your book? Or I don't know, was there anything that surprised you that you didn't anticipate, I guess?
Well, I think earlier I talked about small press versus large press books, and the differences in terms of the accessibility, in terms of, just getting noticed, small press books. And so, which is why I'm glad this is happening, and that you're doing this series. And I think because all my books have been small press books, I think I've had sort of limited opportunities in terms of going places to share about the book. And so I think in terms of this book during the pandemic, when we're doing a lot of things online, I think the reliance online has really benefited me with this book. I feel like people are paying more attention to what's happening in terms of what's being released from publishers, because I think there's a sense of wanting to support the writing community during this time. And so I think in that sense, having this book come out now has been helpful. I think also, as with everybody else, during this pandemic, our routines have really shifted. We've had to do a lot of things differently. We're working in our homes. I'm retired from my job, so I'm lucky in that way. I don't have to be working at home. I don't have to be overseeing my children's education online. I don't have to be doing that. But I do have children still. They're grown, but they're still needing my assistance, and which is why I'm in Sacramento right now. And so I've been helping my younger daughter, who left Ecuador during the pandemic with her infant son, leaving behind her partner, who hadn't yet been granted a visa. And she got a job in Sacramento, which is why we're here. And so doing book promotion stuff while I'm also concerned about what's happening with my daughter and grandson, my daughter's partner, and also a daughter in New York. I think those things, it kind of helps you put things in perspective. It's great to have a book out. It's great to get the support from opportunities like the one that you offer, Christy. I really appreciate it. And it also helps me to manage to get these things done while I'm doing these other things, as a result of our lives having been sort of turned upside down with the pandemic that was totally mismanaged or not managed at all in this country.
Thank you. Julie, I see you have a question. Would you like to ask it directly?
So I question, who do you envision the audience for this book? Because it takes place during young years, like starting with kindergarten. So I was wondering if it's being marketed towards young adults, because it seems a good book for young readers as well as adults. So I was just wondering if you were marketing it as a young adult book, if it has an overall marketing label, and if it's young adults. I was just curious. I know, I think of you as an adult writer, but this book starts so young that I thought maybe you're marketing it that way.
Yeah, that's a good question, Julene. When I was writing these stories and I was sharing them in some workshops, I got some of that feedback. Oh, this is YA. And the thing is, I haven't read a lot of YA, and so I don't know how to write YA. I know that there's at least one thing that sort of indicates it as YA, and that's a young protagonist, and that you don't necessarily go into the adult world, which happens with this book. But I also got feedback that no, it's not YA because of the way it's written. And as I was writing it, I didn't think about it as YA. And when I sent it to, when I was sending it out to agents and small presses, I never really got that feedback. But I also know that, well, I feel that it does include that audience. And I hope they'll read it. But it hasn't been marketed as YA. And I guess I would be afraid to do it that way because it makes me feel like I'm sort of claiming somebody else's genre when I didn't really know that what I was doing. You know, if it fits that genre, then that's great, but I wasn't intentional. And so I don't want to claim something that I didn't know that I was actually doing, I guess. But I hope that younger readers do pick it up because I think it could be, I think they could find it relatable for sure. And I did get, when I was, at least one response from an agent who looked at the manuscript, said that she would have liked to have seen more of the adult world in it. But the thing is, I was writing it from Angie's point of view, from her perspective, and I figured this was her world, this is what she was seeing, this was what she was experiencing. Mm-hmm. And so and I'm really sort of just leaving it up to the reader to decide.
Thank you.
I don't know if you've ever read All the Light We Cannot See, but that
been on my list forever, and I'm sorry I haven't gotten it to yet.
Well, it's a wonderful book, and the two main characters are young, but it's definitely adult fiction. So it's interesting. It would be easy to think that it would have to be written from an older point of view, but yeah, it certainly works to write from younger perspectives. Vivian, I see you've got a question. You can unmute yourself if you'd like to.
I'm really enjoying this, Donna. I'm a debut writer, and I'm promoting. I could really relate to what you said about promoting your book from home. I'm also retired, so I have the advantage of having the time to do it as well. I'm learning social media and that sort of thing. And I do a lot of the promotion myself. And I was wondering, you mentioned an agent. I was wondering if you have one, and if so, what is that advantage?
I actually don't have an agent. I had an agent many years ago with my first book, but she ended up not being the one to sell the book. I ended up with a small press with that book. And I haven't had an agent since, because my second book was a story collection, and I was told repeatedly, nobody reads short stories and nobody wants to represent short story collections. And so with this third book, Angie Rubio, which is another set of stories, although, it can also be sold as a novel in stories because it's been described as that, it still was not attractive to a lot of agents. So, I mean, I definitely think there is an advantage to having an agent, especially if they can sell it to, a larger press, because I do think that books from larger presses have an advantage in terms of visibility. Although, as I said, I've been with 3 small presses, all of whom I've been really happy with, and I really, really appreciate the hard work they put into their books. And each press I've been with, I feel like the books that they produce are really great. So I'm really proud to be on those lists. That said, I do have another novel that I have in manuscript form, and I would like to try and find an agent for that, just because I would like to have that experience of possibly being with a larger publisher, just to see what that's like, just to see what the comparison is in terms of how accessible certain venues are. I have actually approached a couple of bookstores, with proposals about doing events. And, it's kind of like when you query an agent. They'll only answer you if they're interested.
Yes, I understand.
It's like, it's hard to be ignored, but it's part of this whole life. So
yeah. Well, good luck. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Vivian. And I know I know of your book, and it's something I want to read. So, and thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, Vivian did a reading for us a few weeks ago on her memoir, The Last Children of Mill Creek. So it was a wonderful, wonderful event. And
I'll look it up on YouTube.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of pros and cons to being with a small press versus a larger press. So, yeah, I think that's awesome that you're up for looking for an agent to see how that compares. And I would love to know a little bit about, one of your other books that you've written. What was the difference between the first book that you wrote and then this book, this being your 3rd book?
Well, the first book I wrote, so I'm of Filipino and Mexican heritage. And so when I write characters, it's one or the other. I've never, for some reason, I haven't been able to write a character who is of blended heritage like I am. It's like I have to focus on one or the other. And so the first book was about a Filipino American man who had immigrated to this country after the Second World War. And it wasn't really his intention to come. It was just sort of how things happened. And he, created a life for himself here. But something that happened to him on his first and only return to the Philippines comes back to sort of haunt his existence, and makes him recall a lot of things that happened in his early life, and also makes him reflect on things about his life in terms of the change from the Philippines to the United States. And so it's different in that, it's a novel. It's not a collection of stories or a novel in stories like my most recent 2 books. I think most of my work is written in 3rd person. I have a couple of stories in my 2nd book of stories that are in 1st person, but most of my work is in 3rd person. And I think in that first book, I do write from multiple points of view. There are 2 main points of view, and then several lesser points of view. So I do switch points of view in that. So it was different in that respect. And it's a book that is very near and dear to me. It was inspired by my father's immigration story, which I actually knew very little about. My father was a very closed off person. I didn't know a lot about his history. And so when I decided to write this book, I was able to take that little piece of information that I knew was true and then create something fictional around it. And it made me, I don't know, I feel like it made me, and this was after my father died. And so it just made me feel like it made me feel connected to my father in that way.
One of the first books that we published as Hidden Timber Books was an anthology of creative nonfiction, and there is one story that's written by an author who wrote it based on the genealogical records. The whole book is called Family Stories from the Attic, and that was kind of what she did. She built a picture of her ancestors based, solely on the genealogical records and the census and things like that, to find that connection. So I think that's a wonderful way. I mean, I think that's often why we're writers. We are searching for pieces of the puzzle for ourselves or others. So,
right.
I find that interesting. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm wondering about that story about your father after he had passed. How did you go about researching, say, the time frame and the location and that sort of thing to make it authentic?
That's an interesting question, because I set not a lot, but several scenes in the Philippines, which I had not visited at the time. I didn't know, but I had read enough books about the Philippines and books, both fiction, nonfiction, and also, I looked at pictures so I can sort of imagine what it was like, would it be like to walk down the street there. And I looked at photographs that my father had. And so I feel like that was enough to get me started. Mm-hmm. And I didn't do a whole lot of research, really. I researched something when I had a specific question about what something might look like, or something geographical I would look up. But I think for the most part that we as fiction writers can make it up.
Yeah, I'm starting to think about that.
And so yeah, I did that. And I feel like, and this is a question because I'm going to be talking to Alex Espinosa next week, and he wrote a book called anyway, it's set in Mexico at first, and then it moves to United States. But I'm just fascinated by how he puts me into a particular time period, and I'm trying to figure that out. How that works in terms of making that happen. And I think about what I did too. But I think you can create those feelings, that sense of place with very small detail. I mean, it doesn't have to be fully detailed, but just the right details, I think, can make that happen.
Yeah. Well, I ask because I had to do a lot of research because mine is nonfiction, but it was although I enjoyed the research, I felt a real pressure to be accurate, and so I had to do a lot of research. So when it was all done, I thought, I think I'll do fiction next time and just make it up. So I can relate to that.
Yeah, that's true. I'm actually starting to work on some personal essays, and so yes, I'll have to be more diligent about research.
Yeah.
Well, do you have one more excerpt that you'd like to read, Donna?
Yeah, I'll read one more scene that I think shows what happens when something unspoken becomes spoken. And this is from the, let's see, I think it's, find it. Okay, it's from the story called Social Studies. This is 4th grade in Angie's life. You know this is the dumb class, don't you? Wanda Garcia said to Angie at recess, right after Angie had won the California History Bee that Miss Leake had said would be the most challenging test so far in their social studies unit. They would have to stand up, think on their feet, and say their answer out loud. It would be a measure of their preparation. It would test their poise. It would strengthen their character. Miss Leake referred to character a lot, the meaning of which rather stumped even Angie, who had established herself as the smartest one in the class. She was always the first to raise her hand, she sped through the reading levels, and she always scored 100% in spelling with hardly any effort, even breezing through the word squirrel, which everyone else got wrong. So Wanda's question, which is given without malice, but in a sympathetic, helpful way someone would inform another that a booger dangled from her nose or she had food in her braces, dismayed Angie. Because she didn't want to be told something she didn't already know, Angie answered, I know that. There were 3 4th grade classes at Kimball Park Elementary. Angie, who was standing in the 4-square line next to Wanda, looked over at the 4-square game in front of Mrs. Dewey's class, and then beyond that to the children playing in front of Mrs. Wright's class. Angie's next-door neighbor and sometimes best friend, Sylvia Rico, was there, and so was bashful, ever-smiling Teddy Mendoza, who could do long division in his head. But the rest of the kids in Mrs. Wright's class were white. Mrs. Dewey's class was a mixture of white and brown students like some swirled dessert. Then there was Miss Leake's class, which was nearly all brown, and except for the unwanted attentions from the horrible Armando Cornejo, it was a class in which Angie had felt at ease and essential, until Wanda Garcia's question. After school, as she walked home with Eva, she reported this news. Of course that's how they do it, Eva said. They put people together who are alike. Otherwise, you have bedlam and mayhem and anarchy. Angie was afraid to ask what all those words meant. Besides, she couldn't tell if Eva was joking. Because they were new to Kimball Park Elementary, Angie asked, how do they know what I'm like? Eva shrugged. It's in the records. Angie wondered if know-it-all Eva knew what she was talking about. When Angie tried to imagine such records, all that came to mind was a stack of 45s on her dresser at home. The Shirelles, Martha and the Vandellas, Leslie Gore. She would buy the new Beatles record with her next allowance, she decided. While Angie's mind had wandered to records, she fell a few steps behind Eva's slightly pigeon-toed but purposeful stride. Suddenly, it occurred to Angie that if the 4th grade classes were split into dumb, smart, and in between, the 6th grade classes had to be too. She caught up to Eva. What are you in? Eva looked at her as if she were stupid. I'm in a smart class. So this is Angie's first awareness that people, including children, are judged and sorted according to some measure that she doesn't understand. Who decides, she wonders. This is a mystery to her, and it's also a very concerning mystery about who decided she should be in the dumb class.
Yeah, I think that's a good question for a lot of things. Who decides? Who decides all these social norms that we have, and, you know, how we categorize one thing or another, or one person or another? Have you been able to do any book study, or not books? Yeah, like a book study or a book club with your book? Have you had any?
No. If anybody has any suggestions of how to get that done, like.
Yeah, it sounds like it would be a great book for a book club, that it would spark a lot of discussion.
Yeah, maybe I should just write some book club questions. Yeah, that's a good suggestion. Thank you.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I'll put them on my website.
Yeah, definitely. So what are you working on right now that you've got Angie's stories together, and you've got your novel and stories? What, you said you're working on essays.
Yeah, I also mentioned that I have a completed novel in, well, I guess it's still in draft form, although I have had a couple of people look at it and make comments. And it's a novel that grew out of one of the stories in my last collection, Ola and Goodbye, and it's a story called Strong Girls. And in that story, two large overweight girls are recruited for their high school wrestling team. And they're recruited as sort of a joke. And the upshot is that their relationship is really tested as a result of this. And so what I wanted to do was take that relationship and that sisterhood into adulthood, the perils of adulthood. And so the novel addresses issues of body image and sisterhood, and also belonging, as a lot of my other pieces do. So I have that, and I did mention that I was working on some personal essays, because after writing fiction for so long, and I do get a lot of questions about where my stories come from, and then I do talk about how I steal from my life, from my sister's life, from my uncle's life, and create stories out of that. And so I really wanted to think about, putting that, working on it from a nonfiction point of view in terms of those same themes, and also thinking about heritage, and sort of where we come from and the kinds of things that we share in terms of our shared heritages. So I'm looking forward to getting back to work on that, which I think will happen at the beginning of the new year, when I hope we're all celebrating something bigger. Julie.
I was just fingers crossed, hope so. Because my last book also came out during the last election. That was a hard time to have a book come out, so I didn't realize we were in that same camp.
Oh, right.
Last 4 years ago, yeah.
Yes. That was terrible. It was sad.
And Julie, you had a great suggestion too in talking, I think, about the questions for a book club. Yeah.
I wrote a note about that. I'll read. Also, all the points of meaning that you started with, you listed 3 at the beginning, and then when you read each story, you said what the story was about. And, with this one, it was how people get judged, and where that comes from. And then there was about the microaggressions. So when you write up your list of questions, also write up your intentions and meanings for each of the, for the stories or the book on the whole. I think that would be good for people to have that intention of the author spelled out.
And that's interesting that you talk about the intention of the author, because I think that when we're writing, we're not always aware of these intentions. We're just writing a story, right? It's only when we go back and read it and think about it, and then we're actually pulling those things out of something that we wrote, with the idea of just seeing this story and not thinking, oh, well, this is the point I want to make.
Right. But you were just so full of great ones that it would be great for you to outline them.
Thank you, Julie. And thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
Really
it's great
appreciate
to be here.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity for education, for sure. And last week we had an event called the Friday Framework, and it was 3 poets who came together to talk about their poetry, but also their experiences. And it was a similar thing where as a person who doesn't have the same experience, there's a lot for it's very mind-opening to read from a different, from outside someone's perspective, to learn more about that experience. And some of the things that probably I'm sure I've done in the past that are microaggressions that I had never considered, because you don't know until you know. You don't know until you listen and you have a conversation and you start to learn what part you play a lot in some of these things.
Yeah, I like your point about how, you know, there are so many things we can learn by reading and reading widely. One of the things that has frustrated me in trying to get my work out there or trying to get an agent or something like that is getting comments back. Oh, we've already had a Latina author or an Asian author or a person of color. And the fact is that we're not all alike. And this is why even within my own, the groups that I identify with, I know that when I pick up one of those books, I'm going to read something that I know that I can not only relate to, but I know that it's going to be something completely different from what I experienced. And that's going to enrich me. So yeah, I think it's just something to keep in mind, that how we each have stories, and even though they're shared experiences, there are things that we have never experienced in our lives, and that it's important to read the stories by people who have experienced those things.
That's certainly true. I think that's a great place to end tonight, to think about that, what you just said. And that's one of my, one of the things I think about a lot whenever I do any teaching or whatever, that reminding people your stories matter, because like you say, there's that universal aspect, but there's that very personal, unique aspect to every story.
Yeah, and I'd like to thank you again, Christy, for this series that you're doing, and also for the books that you put out. Small presses are so essential, I think, to the book world. So thank you for the work that you do.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
to everybody who came. I really appreciate it, seeing your faces, your names. It's been very great.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Donna, for giving up your evening to meet with us and talk about your work. And again, if you want to go to hiddentimberbooks.com, we've got more readings coming up. I hope to see you all online again soon. And check out Vivian Gibson's recording as well. Hers is another wonderful book by another small press, Belt Publishing, that publishes a lot of stories that you typically don't see out in the mainstream. So, yep, yeah. Definitely small presses are a gift as well.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. And Donna, good luck to you.
Thank you. You too, Vivian.
All right, everybody, have a good night.
Bye.